Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the television miniseries The Forgotten Army, which came out in 2020. The subtitle in Hindi is Azadi Ke Liye, which means for freedom. It was directed by Kabir Khan and written by Kabir Khan, Hiraz Marfacha, and Shubhra Swarup. It's based on the documentary of the same name made by Kabir Khan in 1999, and it tells the true story of Indian independence fighters known as the Indian National Army who allied themselves with the Japanese in World War II in order to oust the British from India. In addition to watching the documentary, we also listened to a few additional podcasts, The Principles of War, We Have Ways of Making You Talk, and Herstory Southeast Asia all have episodes talking about various aspects of the Indian National Army and this kind of period during World War II history. So you can definitely check those out. What did you think of the miniseries?
What did I think of the miniseries? It's interesting because I've seen it twice because I had to do notes for this. And the first time I was really bothered by production quality and the way it felt kind of like a teledrama. And maybe I'm just not used to Indian productions as much, being so Western. But the second time I watched it, I really enjoyed it. So it's interesting, and it's a story I don't know, which is always good. I feel like I expected maybe a more heavy series, and it's heavy in parts, but it's also really light in others, which surprised me a little bit. Production wise, I thought overall it was a little bit too contemporary, but I don't know, I liked it. It kind of grew on me on my two watch journey. How about you?
Yeah, I really vibed with it. I watched it in Hindi, obviously, but there are parts of it that are in English. Just because English was somewhat widely spoken due to colonialism reasons. So, even though I was watching it in Hindi and I kind of had to look at the screen anyway, usually I still find a way to look at my phone if I'm bored, and I really wasn't doing that. I was like pretty captivated. And I think that the two plot lines, sort of present day one and then the World War II one, juxtaposed against each other, I think really worked. And I thought the sort of main love story, I guess, was pretty charming. And all in all, I really enjoyed my watching experience, and I also didn't know anything about this, so I really jumped at the chance to learn more about it. I was trying to dig up more things to read and things to listen to before we recorded because I was so fascinated, especially by the women's regiment, which we'll talk more about.
I don't think we've seen as prominent of a women's story in most Western productions, so I'm really glad that we got to watch this one. One thing that bothered me a little bit was the way the story is told through these two storylines, as you've said. I wish they kept a little bit more mystery because the order in which they tell it kind of immediately tells you that our main character lives, and I feel like they could have done it in a way that wouldn't have given that away straight away. I don't know if that's just me. Maybe it becomes a story of how did he get to this point, which I think they could have made it more exciting somehow. I thought that the modern day plotline very often gave stuff away for me, not just in the beginning, but also throughout. And I kind of wish they'd done that a little bit differently, maybe. But other than that, they work really well together.
I didn't really mind it because we don't really find out what happened between him and his love interest after the war until right at the end. And I was so excited when I thought they were going to reunite. And then when I found out that she died, I was like, no. I was, that one really got me. So I didn't really mind knowing that the main character was going to survive because there was just so much mystery around what had happened with the rest of his life. And I think it's really meaningful that we get this comparison between the love interest character, and of course we'll say her name and the actress, etc., when we get into the plot, but the main female character after the war, she goes on to found a school and continue to fight for humanitarian causes and continues to be involved in politics and all this stuff. And then the main male character, he kind of gives in after the war. He just, because of the way that things turned out, because the Indian National Army was not victorious, he kind of just goes into the rest of his life and he gives up on meeting this girl again and he gives up on making a difference. And so I kind of liked not really knowing that until right at the end.
That's fair. I'll take that. But even even the fact that they don't end up meeting again, they kind of give that away by doing a voiceover of one of her letters, so that we find out slightly before the old man character does. So I feel like it's little things like that that kind of thing. I didn't mind them so much, but I think it would have been stronger if they'd been just slightly differently puzzled together, if that makes sense.
Sure, that's
Um,
fair.
but yeah, overall a very different kind of series. What did you think of the when I was watching this, I was kind of live blogging my responses to this to you. What did you think of the sort of Bollywood drama going on in the background?
I don't know. I guess it was different than what I usually watch, but I was pretty enraptured in the whole thing. I found it compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. But not so much the first time, but the second time a lot more. And I also found the first time I watched it on a really big modern television screen, it kind of like the shots were kind of boring to me, but then the second time I watched it on a smaller screen and it was fine. So I don't know why that is. But it didn't bother me as much on the smaller screen as it did on the big screen, so the cinematography wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah, when you were describing it to me on your first watch, I was like, "Oh, man, is this gonna be a stinker?" And then I watched it and I was like, "I like this actually."
Yeah, I did say, which I think is true, I think it bothered me in the first maybe half hour, and then it got better once you got kind of used to the style. And
Mhm.
I think the first episode has got so much setup going on that it kind of took me a while to get into it. But then once I was into episode 2, I was fully invested, and I did watch it all at once. So I can't say that it made me bored.
There you go.
Right. Shall we get into the plot? Let's get into the plot. There are 5 episodes. Episode 1 opens in July 1945, where we meet our main character, Surinder Sodhi, played by Sunny Kushal. We meet him as he and other soldiers are brought as prisoners to the Red Fort in New Delhi. We learn that they were in the British Indian Army fighting the Japanese in Singapore, but then they joined the Japanese and fought against the British for India's freedom.
The British Indian Army was the largest volunteer army in history, 2.5 million people, and they were instrumental in the Allied victory in Asia against the Japanese. So there was quite a lot of people, quite a lot of Indians fighting for the British. But then during the course of this miniseries, we're going to learn about a small number of them who broke away and decided to use World War II as an opportunity to fight for independence for India.
I guess we see two of those Indians fighting for the British as these men are brought in as prisoners because they are the ones judging them and calling them traitors and telling us that they were most likely will be hanged for their crimes. So, or shot. But this series tries its best to show you the complexities of, I guess, India's journey towards independence, and it's got both opinions in it. I guess the freedom opinion is stronger than the let's stay with our colonizers opinion, but still they try to shine a light on both sides, which I think is really good.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, you will watch it and be like, "Wow, this is very rah-rah Indian independence," but they do it's not just that. They do show other things too.
Yeah, especially with our main character, he gets to express different feelings about the British and then about independence. So I think it's good that they gave him both those feelings.
Yeah, and the British Indian Army is in a weird place where the British quickly realized that if they wanted to successfully maintain order and maintain British rule in India, it would be helpful if they had a British Indian force. And so they would recruit people from certain groups of society and give those people the privileges associated with having essentially a government job or a military job. So a lot of those people felt perhaps more loyalty to the British than they might otherwise because they had been elevated to these more socially powerful positions by being a member of the military. And so they're obviously going to have probably conflicting views on this whole situation. And then, of course, a ton of Indians fought for the British in World War One. Over 1 million of them were deployed, I believe. And they sort of thought, well, okay, we've done all this for the British. We're gonna get home and maybe we'll get home rule. Maybe we'll get more concessions from the British ultimately towards independence. And then that didn't really happen. And so a lot of Indians who had fought in World War One were very disillusioned with the British, and that really fed into these nationalist movements that were picking up steam throughout the 20s and 30s. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves now in this world where there are these really active Indian nationalist movements. People have very different opinions on what form it should take, if it should be violent or nonviolent, etc. So that's the kind of world that these people find themselves in. There's an opening sequence that has real historical clips, and it's a little different each time. It gives us a little bit more historical context. So it's just kind of telling us the situation in which they find themselves during World War II, etc. And yeah, so you get one of those in each episode. So if you don't know anything at all about this, the show it does endeavor to make sure that you know where you're situated in history.
Yes, and there's also historical clips throughout the show, throughout the show in general. Like with every battle, you'll see seconds of real footage before going back into the show. There's plenty of historical footage to see.
I like that. I think it worked. I think they wove it in successfully.
I did too, and they use it sparingly, which I like. Not long enough to take you out of it, but long enough to kind of ground you into the real history, so that's quite nice.
Yeah, and remind you that all this stuff did happen.
Yes. It's not as dramatic as it and romantic as it maybe gets at points. It is a true story. We flash forward to 1996 when an elderly reserve Colonel Surinder Sodhi, played by MK Raina, visits his sister's family in Singapore. His nephew Omar, played by Karan Theo Malhotra, wants to do a photo report on student protest in Myanmar, which is former Burma, in hopes of getting an internship with the BBC out of it. So this is the other conflict that we're watching. And they're eerily similar in the way that people are fighting for their freedom.
Yeah. This is 50 years later. So the guy we saw in the first scene, this is him as an old man 50 years later visiting his family. And then we're going to find out a little bit more about what happened in the in between times as the show goes on.
I like that Amar doesn't seem too enthusiastic to be looking after his uncle at this point because they call him the family recluse. He's not being in touch very much, I think. He's just after the war, he probably just became a bit of a loner.
Yeah. This conflict in Myanmar that they're focused on in the 1996 timeline. Myanmar, formerly Burma, was colonized by the British in the 19th century. And then during World War II, Burma ended up being controlled by the Japanese. Between 1942 and 1945, like many former European colonies, the Japanese sort of moved across Asia, just conquering as they went. And many Burmese fought on the side of the Japanese. Much of the country was destroyed by fighting. There was substantial infrastructure damage. Then, though political rivals backed by the British assassinated the architect of Burmese independence, General Aung San, in 1947, Burma nevertheless became independent in 1948, along with quite a lot of former European colonies in the wake of World War II. A lot of European countries were bankrupt. They couldn't afford to maintain them anymore. There were independence movements happening in all of these countries. And so this is quite a common story in this time period. The country endured several decades of economic and social instability before a military coup overthrew the democratically elected government in 1962. That military regime ruled from 1962 to 1988 until mass protests and riots forced the adoption of a multi party system. However, this didn't last long. The military junta took power again after the 1990 general election because the results were not what they were hoping it would be. And then there were massive student protests and a crackdown on political dissent in 1996, which is the year in which the later timeline of the show takes place. Burma, given its shared border with India, was also the location of several important Indian National Army battles, as we will also see later in the show.
Yeah, these people just cannot catch a break. It's like oppressor, colonizer, or stupid people trying to not give these people their freedom.
Yeah, yeah, it's not ideal. For sure. Well, February 4th, 1942, in Singapore, Lieutenant Sodhi and his close friend Arshad, played by Rohit Chaudhary, serve in the British Indian Army. They're stationed northwest of Singapore near the Malaya Peninsula. Everyone is convinced at this point that the Japanese are not going to attack by land because Malaya, a super thick jungle, just doesn't really make any sense. You know, you'd have a tough time getting tanks through there. The British just can't imagine it. And so they're like, well, this is an island. They're going to attack by sea. So Sodi and his buddies are posted here. Most people don't think they're going to see any action, but Sodi has a real bad feeling about it.
He even tries to tell his British commanders about it, and they kind of laugh at him or call him stupid, and are generally pretty racist towards him. But we immediately know that Sodi is a smart cookie. I really like Sodi, and I also really like Sodi and Arshad together. They have a great, funny friendship.
I like them too. Arshad is kind of a hoot. He's like the silly friend, you know, he's the sidekick.
February 7 of the same year, so 1942, we meet Rasama, played by T.J. Banu, as she is unfortunately chased and raped by a British officer close to where the unsuspecting Indians and their Australian counterparts are playing a match of cricket. Because they've nothing else to do because they don't think they're gonna be attacked. But then the Japanese are on top of them before they know what's happening. At first they hold fast, but the fighting is intense. But the British, not knowing that they outnumber the Japanese greatly in the Battle of Singapore, they have 90,000 and the Japanese are only 30,000, they capitulate. And so the two must eventually surrender, which is not a fun time because they are literally standing over the Japanese, holding them at gunpoint, and then they get the order that they have to surrender. It's like the strangest moment.
They do a good job depicting this in the show. You get to see both the British brass and the Japanese brass, and both sides are like, honestly, if we don't like the Japanese are basically like, yeah, if we don't get them to capitulate now, they're gonna realize that they can kick our ass. And the British are like, well, if we don't capitulate now, the Japanese are gonna kick our ass. Like you're seeing both sides of the
Yeah.
equation, which I enjoyed. And it was just really interesting in real life. I recently read that book about the Battle of Manila and the Japanese general who was here at the fall of Singapore. Because he was so successful, they called him the Tiger of Malaya. And he went on to fight MacArthur at the Philippines at the end of the war in 1945, and he ended up being executed for war crimes. So,
Ugh.
so that happened. This whole thing where they took the British by surprise and they almost tricked them. You know, Yamashita was sitting across from the British and he knew full well that they had him outnumbered. And he was sitting there like, nope, you can't think about it overnight. Nope, absolutely not. You have to decide now if you're going to capitulate. You have to tell me right now. And the British, not really knowing the size of his force, were like, well, we don't want to get slaughtered out here. I guess we're going to capitulate. So it was almost kind of a ruse on the part of the Japanese, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, the one of the podcasts that we listened to also emphasized the quality of the intelligence that the British had, which apparently was not very good because otherwise they would have known that they had been outnumbered. And they also even say this in the show that information is power, and they clearly did not have that on their side, on the British side. And I just feel so bad for Saudi and Arshad, who are really proud of having won this immense battle against Japanese on bikes. That made me laugh for some reason.
They actually called this attack the Bicycle Blitzkrieg, which I found very entertaining.
I feel like the Dutch could have done that, to be honest.
Singapore, obviously a colony, major symbol of British power in the East for over 100 years by the time World War II rolls around. Like we said, it long had its defenses built up in anticipation of an attack by the sea. And the British did have intelligence well in advance that the Japanese might attack via Malaya instead. In fact, Lieutenant General Percival, who we do see in the show and who commanded the British forces at Singapore, he had even expressed that he believed the British would have to defend Malaya in order to protect Singapore. But everyone was just like, nah. So unfortunately, a combination of logistical issues, superior Japanese air power, and what I'm gonna graciously call lack of understanding of Japanese goals by the British enabled the Japanese to take Malaya in just 2 months. A lot of this was racism. They just genuinely thought, you know, the Japanese don't have their shit together. They're not going to be able to coordinate an attack on this scale, and they were wrong. And so yeah, so the Japanese took Malaya in 2 months. They took Singapore in 8 days, and this was massive. Churchill called this the defeat at Singapore the greatest military disaster in British history. And part of this, again, was racism. They were like, Guys, we got our asses kicked by some non-whites. What are we gonna do? Singapore ultimately was returned to British control after the war, but its loss dealt a body blow to the British Empire. This was pretty inspirational for a lot of people who wanted their independence from Britain, as you can imagine, and Singapore itself achieved self-governance in 1959.
In episode 2, we open on February 16, 1942. Sodi and Arshad and everyone else are still in Japanese captivity, but they are lucky not to be executed like the Australians, who they see get decapitated, which is not fun. They are brought into occupied Singapore, where Sodi and Arshad are photographed by a girl whose camera is bigger than her. They mention that explicitly in the series. And her name is Maya, and she's played by Sharvari, so I'm guessing she's like Shakira, the Indian. They witness the Japanese treat the Singaporeans pretty badly, which is a common result in many places across the Pacific where cautiously optimistic colonized populations quickly realized that the Japanese, releasing them from their colonial oppressors, made things worse. The British were bad, but the Japanese were not much better, and in many cases worse.
Yeah. And I think part of the debate and discussion in India around this time when they were talking about whether or not to ally with the Japanese in these nationalist circles was like there were some people who were like, guys, the Japanese would not be an improvement. But then there were also other people who were like, British out at any cost. So
Yeah.
that was definitely you know, a matter of contention.
If you want to hear a good conversation about that, We Are Afraid of Making You Talk podcast has an interesting conversation about this exact topic and what people thought and what the objections were versus the what's the opposite of an objection? I don't know. The opposite of that.
The next day in Singapore, the Indian soldiers are turned over to the Japanese by the British. As you can imagine, this led to a sense of, for a lot of them, of having been abandoned by the British after the fall of Singapore. Japanese officers then persuasively argue that the British have used Indian soldiers as expendable resources and encouraged them to fight for India's independence instead, thereby allying themselves with the Japanese and against the British. And, a lot of people were interested in this for nationalism reasons, for getting rid of the British reasons. Of course, there was also the looming fear of being sent to Japanese labor camps, which we've discussed these briefly in previous episodes. I'm thinking particularly of the narrow road to the deep north. Were not great places to be, and a lot of people didn't survive their time in the camp. So that if nothing else, that could be your motivation for joining this army. So they're forming an Indian army led by Mohan Singh, played by Gurdeep Singh, and this is appealing to some people, including Arshad, but our main character Sodi initially hesitates. He's not 100% sure right off the hop.
No, and it's also because 3 generations of his family have fought for the British, and that's all they know. Like, sometimes maybe better an enemy you know than an enemy you don't know. So, or in this case, I guess it would be allies, the Japanese. Nationalist leader Subhash Chandra Bose, known as Netaji, which means respected leader in Hindi, gives a speech to inspire the INA. This is where we hear the famous term Chalo Delhi, which means basically to Delhi, and we hear this throughout the show. And at this rally, Maya donates her earrings to the cause, and she's also pretty keen on joining. Sodi at this point also makes up his mind to join.
Yeah.
I
Should
wonder
always
why.
You should always go the way of the pretty girls. Good shout, Sodi.
Well, she's a kick-ass lady, I won't lie. Like, she's probably more kick-ass than Sodi, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, she's gonna be photographed donating her earrings to the cause, and it's really gonna lead to her parents not being very impressed by the whole situation.
No, because she also lied about where she was.
Yeah. So Mohan Singh wanted to raise a much larger force than the Japanese were comfortable with. Because bearing in mind here, the Japanese are like, yeah, yeah, we want you to raise an army to fight the British. However, comma, we don't want you to be a force that, that we might have to fight at some point.
Nah.
So because he wanted this and because he wanted operational autonomy for the Indian National Army, he didn't get along with the Japanese very well. And ultimately, they arrested him and detained him in 1942. So at that point, the INA, the Indian National Army, went dormant for a little bit. And then Subhash Chandra Bose came in and he reorganized it a little bit and he was going to be the new leader. He was a famed nationalist politician. He was one of the ones who believed that violence was the answer to evicting the British from India. Certainly not the only opinion, as we've said, that put him at odds with other nationalist leaders. He actually went to Germany in 1940 to seek Nazi support and raise a force from Indian POWs that the Germans had captured in North Africa. He got a little bit of a lukewarm reception. He dabbled with the Italians a little bit. He ultimately ended up returning to Singapore in 1943, where he formed a provisional government that declared war on Britain. And when the Indian National Army was eventually defeated at the end of the war, as we'll see in the show, was fled and died in a plane crash in August of 1945. So he was not part of the post war movement, I guess, toward independence.
No, which is kind of I was gonna say funny, but it's not really funny. But imagine fighting so hard for independence through means that are pretty like you either win or you fail, and then you try to get away from it when you eventually initially fail and you die. It's kind of rough.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, he perhaps was a little bit out of his depth with this whole thing, but nevertheless, the impact of the Indian National Army far exceeded their actual military victories. So, yeah, we'll definitely talk about that a little more.
In episode 3, we start again in Singapore in July 6, 1943, so we made a little jump, and we meet a group of street musicians who get in trouble for playing an English song, and they're only allowed to play Japanese songs at this point, which they don't know. And then they attempt to steal something from their occupiers. And to escape their Japanese chasers, they join the INA, which is kind of funny because
Yeah.
they really did not want to.
Though most of the INA had been prisoners of war of the Japanese after the British defeats in Malaya and Singapore, about 18,000 civilians would also ultimately join. So it's cool that we get to see a little bit of that in the show as well.
This group of musicians kind of adds a little bit of light into this opening of this episode. It's funny and they're funny and they do have to run for their lives though, which is not really that funny.
That age old problem when you have to join the army to avoid going to jail. Maya and the man her parents want her to marry join the military as well. He's a doctor, I think, so we get to see him do a little bit of medical stuff as the show goes on. So probably useful to the cause. But and honestly, he doesn't seem like that bad of a guy. He's just not as cool as Sodi, so that's unfortunate for him.
Yes.
So yeah, so they join the cause. So does Rasama, who has destroyed her abuser's home and left in the wake of his death at the hands of the Japanese. This was the woman that we saw, unfortunately, being sexually assaulted in an earlier scene. The women's regiment is called the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, and this regiment is led by Lakshmi Sehgal, played by Shruti Seth in the miniseries.
I loved it. This plot. It's almost better than everything that came before it.
So the women's regiment is real. The officers consisted mostly of educated Indian expats. So there were quite a lot of Indians that lived in Malaya and Singapore, these areas that are outside of India itself. Maybe their parents were born in India or their grandparents, but they're of Indian descent and they tended to be educated at British schools. But the enlisted women, the majority of them were these workers who had been brought to these rubber plantations by the British to work. And so these were people who were not literate. These were people who had nothing. And so they really had nothing to lose by joining up with the INA and, fighting for Indian independence from the British. And so, and 80% of them were teenage girls, which I thought was pretty rad. So these volunteers, they all underwent this super intense 3 months training regimen. Some of them were selected for specialized jungle warfare training. A lot of them were trained in medicine so they could be nurses. The women had to be proficient in handling firearms, sharp melee weapons, and they participated in regular marching drills with full gear. So we do see that in the show. They're being put through their paces the same as the men. Ultimately, the INA's advance was turned back before the women's regiment could be deployed in frontline combat, but they very much were considered a combat unit. Like the goal was ultimately for them to fight for Indian independence, literally. They did ultimately experience airstrikes and guerrilla attacks. Two of the Ranis were killed. And of course, as you can imagine, the regiment had substantial symbolic value. It was a major propaganda coup against the British. It was also used as a recruiting tool for men because they were like, look, your mothers and your sisters and your wives are taking up arms and you're too cowardly to do it. So definitely a major component there. Segal herself, who led the regiment, she was not only a medical doctor and an officer in the INA, but she was also the Minister of Women's Affairs in this provisional government that had been set up by Bose. She was captured by the British in May of 1945, but she survived the war. She went on to undertake humanitarian and women's causes. She actually ran for Indian president in 2002, though she did not win. She received the second highest civilian award in India, the Padma Vibhushan, in 1998, and she lived a long life. She passed away in 2012. So, pretty kick ass lady, and this regiment of women is pretty kick ass as well.
I love these women, and I'm glad in some way that if they had to be imprisoned, that it happened to be by the British, because I think that if it had been the Japanese, I know they were aligned, so it wouldn't have been, but I don't think they would have fared very well under the Japanese, as we've seen from other imprisonments by Japanese people. So I'm really glad that they got to live a long life, even though the British were stupid for doing this to them in the first place.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We obviously see the Japanese completely confused by the concept of women in combat in the show. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, actually, when the American army nurses were taken prisoner on the Philippines after the fall of Manila in 1942. The Japanese put them in a civilian internment camp rather than a military internment camp because they were just kind of baffled by the concept that there would be women in the military. I just thought it was interesting that, here we are again with the Japanese being like, "What is happening right now?"
Yes, and that's not the only time that happens in the show because, and this also apparently actually happened, the Japanese gifted cows to the INA for milk to help their soldiers and feed the wounded and all that. And they ended up giving them bulls, which don't give any milk, but they did not know this. And it just made me laugh so hard, but it makes sense because the Japanese don't have any dairy in their diet. But just the Japanese being confused is a whole vibe.
Yeah, I actually I really enjoyed the actor who played the main Japanese guy. His name is Toshiji Takashima, and I just enjoyed he had such an expressive face, so you could just tell he was deeply confused a lot of the time. I really enjoyed it. Sodi and Arshad volunteer as training officers for the women's division and get them shipshape for battle. And it's kind of interesting because here is where we find out that, especially for the era, as evidenced obviously by the fact that they had this women's combat regiment, this whole movement was pretty progressive, especially in terms of reaching across social class and the caste system and these different ethnicities and language groups and that kind of stuff. And we see that Sodi acknowledges this, that, this is really important and this is much different than the British Indian Army, which was like, quite regimented.
Yes. I do like that before they're allowed to do this job, they have to talk to Lakshmi about doing this job. And she's like, "Oh, so you think you understand women?" And they get given a little bit of a hard time, but then Sodi speaks very respectfully about his sisters and his mother, and she allows them to train these women. And these women, at first, they are not very good, but what they lack in skill at this point, they make up for in heart because Rasama, especially, is very fiery and really wants to fight this fight and says that if anyone needs this fight, it's the women, which is true because they are abused by the British badly. So it's such a kick-ass moment when she has a little speech.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, obviously none of these women have any military background, but they also come from these rubber plantations where they don't have any kind of experience in working within a regimented system. Most of them have never been to school. Some of them have never worn shoes before, and suddenly they have a uniform and they're having to march in boots. So this is massive, 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 like psychological shock jumping into this completely different lifestyle than they're accustomed to.
Yeah, I wish there were more regiments like this for us to talk about. I wonder if there are. Maybe one day we'll find another.
Well, yeah, definitely unique in terms of probably the only women's combat regiment in this era, certainly in Southeast Asia at least.
Yeah. The INA soldiers hear that if they fight the British and they happen to be captured, they will be treated as traitors and they will be executed. So they are given a choice. They can leave now or they can stay, and all of them stay. And it actually only strengthens their resolve. They continue to train, though a grenade related incident causes Sodi to nearly lose his hearing, which we see in the very moment we meet old Sodi. He's kinda, you're like, wait, is he deaf? And he is a little bit. Because I think it's one of the musicians actually almost forgets to throw his grenade, which makes it go off near Sodi's head.
That feeling when you almost forget to throw your grenade.
Yes.
The feeling when you forget to do the only thing you're supposed to do with a grenade.
Yeah, this poor man looked very scared. I kind of felt sorry for him. So he ends up in the hospital ward. During this time, he and Maya grow closer as he's shouting at her since he can't hear her or himself.
Yes, I did really find that cute, and then after he's recovered, she comes up and, like, starts mouthing words at him, and he's like, "Oh, no, I can't hear you," and she's like, "Just fucking with you." I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but I did enjoy that, I thought it was cute.
I do like the dynamic between Maya and Sodi, and then also Maya and her childhood best friend, the man who's a medic. I think he knows. I think he knows he's not the one.
Yeah, unfortunate for him, but he's up in competition against this guy who is pretty high up in the military, who is, like, pretty handsome, who has a sweet mustache, and he's really pulling it off, so what are you gonna do?
I also thought he was one of the best actors in the show. He's pretty nuanced. I liked it.
Yeah, definitely. Back in our quote unquote present day timeline, although, guys, 1996 gets further and further away.
So it's 30 years ago. It's crazy.
I know. So back in our 1996 timeline, the older Sodi joins his nephew Amar in Myanmar for the protest that Amar wants to cover. But Amar soon gets a sobering lesson in military brutality. And when the protests turn more violent, Sodi is forced to shoot a soldier who's assaulting Rani, played by Paloma Manapa. This is a family friend who's been helping to guide the group. And when old Sodi, like, he basically takes a gun off one of the guards and then shoots him. It's so intense, man. But I felt like the older actor really did a great job of, like, he goes from, like, sort of slightly doddering old man to, like, remembering his military training, stone cold killer in, like, the snap of your fingers.
Yes, and then the second he's done it, he turns back into the old man again and he's like, oh shit, I killed a man.
Yeah, and I love how Ronnie's like, "You shot a soldier, they'll kill you for that." And I'm just like, "This man fought in World War II, you can't tell him nothing."
No, I guess she doesn't really, like, know or understand yet.
She will. Spoilers.
Spoilers! Episode 4 is done in Myanmar in 1996. And having just killed a man, they have to get the fuck out. And they get onto a train and then into the jungle. And Rani at this point tells old man Sodi about her grandmother Janki, who was also in the INA. But she's like, "Do you know her?" And he's like, "No, I don't." And then they have to get away from the soldiers again, and they hide in a boat to get across the river to go to junkie school for safety for the time being.
So then back in Rangoon, Burma in 1943, our soldiers head toward the Indian border under the leadership of the Japanese. Not only is Sodi's story sort of getting a retread, but geographically they're in the same place, which I found interesting. Sodi's not pleased about this. He just wants to liberate India. He's not really vibing with this whole we do what the Japanese tell us to do type thing. And he thinks the INA should be led by Indian officers.
I mean, he's not wrong. While they're on a train at night, Spitfires bomb their train, and lots of people die, and the women are trying to save all these men, and the men are trying to save everyone else, and it's not a fun time. So, with the train out of commission, they have to continue to impale on foot. The men go to impale, and the women, the Rani of Jhansi, are setting up base camp in Maimyo, so they are no longer in the same place. This made me laugh because when they were continuing on foot, they showed you a little map of where they were going. And then I noticed, and I think it might be a slight error, that they pass Rangoon again, and I was like, wait, weren't they just at Rangoon?
Sodi and Maya flirt up a storm. Maya promises him that they'll take a photo together when they get to Delhi at the Red Fort, and you're like,
Mm,
"Hmm, he will get to the Red Fort at a certain point, but it will be for a trial for treason."
yep. This was so cute though. I was like, "Oh my god, why are they so adorable?"
I know. I think they both did a great job. I think they have natural chemistry, but yeah, the acting was pretty good too.
I did also really like that in the beginning of their quote unquote love story, Zodi's kind of a baffling buffoon around her, and then later on they get on slightly easier together, but it's so cute.
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
Next up, we're near the India-Burma border on April 14, 1944. It's a big, long battle, and this is where we hear the theme song of the show for the first time, but not the last time, because you hear it like 6 times. It is because the INA are able to place a flag on Indian soil, which is a major symbolic victory. And after the battle, Saudi wants to press on, but the INA soldiers are told they have to hold the position instead. And this is not a very good idea because it allows the Brits to restock while no supplies are coming for the INA. And the monsoon is starting, so it rains relentlessly. It's like the Pacific on steroids. And lots of people start dying of malnutrition and all sorts of other jungle diseases, and it's no fun. And as this goes on, the British drop pamphlets advising surrender and saying, look, if you come over, we'll take you we'll imprison you, but then you'll get to go home afterwards, like, no hard feelings. And the Japanese man, our Japanese leaders, like, please don't.
Yeah. So at this point in the war, the Japanese know that the British are probably going to attempt to retake Burma because earlier on in the war, the Japanese were sweeping across the Pacific, and now the reverse is happening. They're kind of on the back foot. So they decide to preemptively strike at the northeast border of India. So we mostly see the INA in the movie, but there are Japanese troops there as well. And the plan is that the British have all these really valuable supply bases at Impal. And if the Japanese can hold the area, not only can they take advantage of these supply bases, but they can also cut further British supply lines. For the Japanese, the battle starts off pretty well, but ultimately they underestimated the British ability to bring up reinforcements and they were ultimately pushed back. So, because of that, now they don't have access to these British supplies that they thought they were going to have access to, and they're not getting supplies from their side either. So, because of this, they refuse to give up, and we've talked about this pretty often before about the Japanese will continue to persevere even after perhaps it would be a better idea to surrender, and they end up getting caught in this monsoon. They don't have any supplies as we see in the film. Ultimately, it's a catastrophic loss. This is one of the worst defeats ever suffered by Japan. The Japanese 15th Army, this was a group of 85,000 men and 53,000 were killed or went missing. So, yeah, pretty
Wow.
pretty catastrophic.
3 months of absolute fucking rain hell later, the Japanese tell them that they're going to retreat, which, they could have done sooner, I feel, but like you said, they keep persevering. What remains of the INA soldiers trek into the wilderness. The Rani of Jhansi regiment looks for them, trying to find them, but it's difficult. It doesn't, like, I don't know how much time kind of goes by in this thing, but it feels like they are pretty deep into the jungle and pretty lost. And we also see our Japanese leader kind of show his respect to Sodi and his men, and then, as is custom for Japanese commanders, kill himself, which is not fun to watch.
No, and they definitely show it to you.
Yeah, they're like, let's do this really slowly and close up.
I was interested when I was reading about this because part of the reason why the British were caught so much by surprise at Singapore was because they had a policy that they just simply did not fight during monsoon season because especially once with the advent of motorized vehicles, right? They're just going to get caught in the muck. There's really no point. You can't move a substantial
Mm.
amount of men and material when it's just pounding rain every day. And the Japanese decided that they were not bothered about fighting during monsoon season. And so that's why the fall of Singapore happens in what we would call the winter. So the British pretty much had to change a lot of their assumptions, a lot of their policies when they were fighting against the Japanese. And so the fact that this battle is happening at all during monsoon season and the British are actually prepared for once, this is based on lessons that they learned at the fall of Singapore 3 years earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When people think, well, we think like this, so everybody else must also think like this.
Yeah. Episode 5, Maya finds a cave where she writes, longing letters to Sodi, who's still missing him and his whole group. Eventually, the women find the men. Maya brings Sodi to the cave. They have cave sex. And then this is mirrored by the 1996 timeline where Sodi returns to that exact cave as they're going through the jungle and he has a little cry because he finds the letter that she left for him, etc.
Yeah, I thought this was weird. Like, weird in the sense that how come he finds these letters now? Like, they've seen each other in the caves. Why did she not give him these letters?
I think he did read the letter, but I think he put it back.
Probably, and then they get, spoiler, they get attacked
Yeah.
by the British. So I guess he didn't have time to take them with him. I will say that they are very pretty people, which is why I kind of allowed and did not feel like rolling my eyes at the little love scene that they had.
I do feel like they definitely got some sand in the crack, right?
Yes, they're then rudely awakened because the British are attacking their new camp from the air. And by this time, as the British ravage this camp, Saudi's been left in charge by Central Command, and he's told that he is to decide whether they should retreat or not. And the soldiers, they don't all seem to agree on this. And then Saudi has a rousing speech about why they should not retreat, and it's good.
Yeah, I think one of the things I liked about his characterization was that I really wasn't sure which way he was gonna go. I was like, you know what? Genuinely, I could also see him being like, you know what? I don't want all of these young people who will form a part of creating the new India, whatever that looks like. I don't want them all to be killed here today. And then he went the other direction, and I was like, no, that works too.
I think they gave him as a character enough room to ruminate on his own feelings about it, and even about his own Indian pride, which he had to discover that he had. And I like that they gave him time to not be sure about it, and it's good.
Yeah. What is depicted slightly differently in the show is that as the British pushed into Burma, the Indian National Army attempted to hold the line at this river called Irrawaddy. And if you watch the documentary, you'll get to see a couple of the soldiers who were there discussing their experiences. They ultimately get pushed back into this area around this mountain called Mount Popa, and they're supposed to hold the line there as well. But ultimately, they're forced into this long and terrible withdrawal. Everybody's sick, they don't have ammunition, they don't have food, and this ends in death or capture for most of them.
Yes, it just made me sad. Like, we've gotten to know these people. I wanted them to all be fine. But, also we need a little bit of drama, I guess. In one of Maya's letters that we hear in the voiceover, we learn that she's changed her name to Janky, which is Rainey's godmother. And so they are one and the same. And also he learns of this, and then as they arrive to the school, he also learned that she's died and that he's just missed her. Which is so sad. This man spent such a long time in the show crying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge bummer, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I was messaging Mart after you had gone to bed, and I was like in all caps, I was like, "Oh my god, they're gonna meet again." And then, like, 2 seconds later, I was like, "No, they're not gonna meet again."
Well, I guess they are a little bit in the afterlife.
It's true, they are yeah, they are gonna meet in the afterlife, yeah. Yeah, so back in 1945, the women's regiment takes care of the wounded and gets them to safety while the men move on to a city where they have an epic battle with the British. The British have tanks, the INA definitely don't have anti-tank weapons or tanks of their own, so it's pretty one-sided. Arshad ends up dying to save Sodi, which is a huge bummer. And Maya, upon hearing the battle, goes after the men so she can help, but unfortunately, Sodi has already been captured. And this takes us full circle back to the beginning where we see him being brought into New Delhi to face charges for participating in the INA.
This battle, man, this battle reminded me a little bit of Saving Private Ryan in a way, but also when Arshad sacrifices himself to save Sally, it's so dramatic, and he looks at him and he smiles before he dies, and then he gets blown up. Which I don't know. I know it's supposed to be sad, but I just laughed because it's so dramatic.
Well, I like that one better than earlier in the movie when they're showing the battle where they get to plant the flag. There's, I think it's the musician guy, the guy who plays the flute, he's dying, and
Yeah.
the really, patriotic music is playing, and he gazes up at the flag fluttering in the breeze, and he, like, weakly salutes it, and then he dies. His eyes slowly close.
He also had a little bit of a love story with Osama. That was kind of cute. but also unnecessary at the same time.
Yeah, Rasama and the flute guy had a little will they won't they flirtation going on, but unfortunately he did not survive. But
He did not
honestly,
live long enough.
she don't need that man.
No.
Rasama's been through so much. She can handle her own shit.
Yeah. In 1996, Sandy and the kids attempt to escape the soldiers who are still chasing them, and they are trying to cross into Indian territory, where we also have seen them cross into Indian territory in the earlier timeline. But they have to climb. I want to say it's a waterfall bit that they have to climb, and Sandy breaks his ankle, and he's like, "Hey, you have to leave me behind. You have to go into Indian territory and get the Indian army to help me, and then it will be fine. It'll be fine." And then they get away, and he holds off the soldiers while they get to safety. But then he's killed by an enemy grenade just in the spot where his comrades died decades before. And it's so dramatic and sad. And this poor nephew has to watch it happen.
Sodi, who gave up after the war, got to have his moment where he died for something after all in the end.
Yes, he died for the safety of his nephew and his friends.
So we get this whole bit where Ghost Maya comes up and grabs Ghost Sodi by the hand and pulls him up and he's young again. And it sounds cheesy, but honestly, I kind of vibed with it. They're playing that epic patriotic song again that they love so much that gets played like 27 times during this movie. I literally I looked it up after so I could listen to it. I was like, is this my new favorite song or have I just heard it so many times that it's stuck in my head? But anyway, so you see and, we get to see Arshad and all the soldiers who had died again, and they're young once again, and that's very hopeful. And then we get an end card that says, "Almost 26,000 soldiers of the Indian National Army gave up their lives in their fight for India's freedom. Of the survivors, not a single INA soldier was reinducted into the Army of Free India. Despite petitions and letters, the government refused to give freedom fighters' pension to the surviving INA soldiers. With the passage of time, the Indian National Army became the Forgotten Army." They said the title, take a drink.
I did think the ghost scene, as cheesy as they can be in other movies, they kind of fit the overall style of this show, so it works. I feel like if it had been a Western production, I would have rolled my eyes, but in this, it was kind of good.
Yeah, I liked it.
Is it?
Honestly, even I just even in the moments that were a little cheesy, I could find it in my heart to forgive because I was like, "Yeah, you know what? It kind of matches the vibe."
Yeah, maybe that's why I liked it so much more the second time, because the vibe is just what it is, and if you like, once you get used to the vibe and like accept the vibe and go with the vibe and be the vibe, then it's fine.
I will say too, because I had watched the documentary first, the production values are significantly better in the miniseries. So I guess I was just pleasantly surprised because I was like, "Oh, well, I didn't have super high hopes after watching the documentary." If anyone wants to watch the documentary, it is also called The Forgotten Army. You can find it on YouTube. It's split into 2 parts because I guess it was in like 6 mini episodes. So there's The Forgotten Army episodes 1 to 3 and then The Forgotten Army episodes 4 to 6 if anyone wants to check it out.
Listen, you can find it on YouTube, but better yet, you will be able to find it on our freaking website because I will put it on there.
Excellent.
Along with all the podcast episodes that we listen to. So you have your whole documented Indian Army media packet ready on our website.
There you go. No one's doing it like us.
More notes.
So, as we discussed, the INA was not victorious in battle, but they were instrumental in hastening the end of British dominion over India. In November of 1945, court martial trials of 3 prominent members of the INA began. All 3 had been former members of the British Indian Army, so what they were being tried for was in effect waging war against the king. Because they're saying, like, look, you essentially betrayed the British Indian Army by joining this other army. The trials had a very important symbolic necessity for the British. As I said earlier, the British Indian Army had long been used as a tool to help the British dominate India. So they're like, well, we can't let this slide because maybe more people will think, maybe more people will get ideas, kind of thing. These 3 men who were on trial, they were Captain Shah Nawaz Khan, Lieutenant Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, and Captain Prem Kumar Sehgal. And it was interesting because really, you couldn't have picked it better. They represented the three major religions practiced in India. So one of them was Sikh, one of them was Muslim, and one of them was Hindu, and all of them were Punjabi, and that's where the majority of the British Indian Army was recruited from. And so there was this immediate uproar when these trials happened. People were not very happy about this. And also, at this point, British propaganda was no longer able to prevent the story of the INA from spreading across the country. So, this was really stirring up a lot of nationalist feelings for people when they realized what had happened. And when all three men were found guilty in January of 1946, the British sentenced them to transportation for life, which always just makes me laugh as a punishment. I'm like, we were still exiling people in the 20th century? Okay. But Field Marshal Claude Auchinleck, who we talk about in our SAS Rogue Heroes episodes, if you're curious about that, he was the commander in chief of the British Indian Army at this point. He kind of read the tea leaves. He's like, if we exile these guys, there's going to be riots. Like, people are going to freak out. And so he intervened to suspend the sentences. But effectively, at this point, the bell could not be unrung. The Royal Indian Navy went on to mutiny in February of 1946, and the whole anti colonial movement picked up steam, and India ultimately achieved independence in 1947.
But not before the British introduced partition, and we won't go into it now, but what a parting gift. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
yeah, really. If you want to look into partition at all, the super short Coles Notes version is that the British decided that they wanted to split up India when they were leaving. They brought in a lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe, and the reason why they chose this guy was because he had never been to India before and he didn't know shit about India. So they were like, he'll be able to partition India in a way that's fair for the Muslims and the Hindus and the Sikh. And he shows up like a month before independence is supposed to happen, like 36 days or something, and they're like, "Yeah, draw a line on a map." And he draws these lines, and it's such a shit show, you guys, because the Muslim population of India is predominantly split between these two areas in like the northwest and the northeast. The way they end up splitting up is so stupid. There's like Pakistan on the one side, and then you have India in the middle, and then you have East Pakistan on the other side in what is today Bangladesh. It's like a whole thing. Obviously, as you can imagine, the second this happens, violence erupts, and it's a whole situation. 15 million people are displaced, millions of people are killed. It's a whole thing. So the British pretty much drop a grenade and run away. And it's to the point where this lawyer who drew this line on the map, he literally would not even let them pay him because he was like, this is a shit show. I already know this is going to be a clusterfuck. I don't want to be associated with it any more than I already have.
They might as well have said to this man, close your eyes and draw a line, because it would have had the same effect.
The crazy thing is, like, if you look at a city, I was listening to this podcast earlier where they were talking about Lahore, which is today in Pakistan. It was the majority of the population of the city were Muslim, but the majority of the property owners were Hindu. And you also have a group of like 6 million Sikhs hanging out in the middle here who, they're not getting their own separate area. So it's like, well, are they going to join the Hindu side or the Muslim side or whatever? It's a mess. It's a whole ass disaster.
Yeah, like, I think Indians weren't a fan of the British while they were in charge, but I think they didn't make themselves any more popular by that decision.
No, they absolutely did not. A lot of these freedom fighters who had fought for the INA were really disillusioned about this because, and I think our main character even says this in the show, he became a refugee in his own homeland because a lot of people, who had previously lived in like Bengal, for example, it's like, well, now you can't go back there because you're not part of the ethnic majority. You have to go and live somewhere else. So a lot of them were like, well, this is not the India that I fought for, which is,
Yeah.
kind of a bummer.
Yeah. So yeah, a wildly different point of view than any we've covered before. So I feel like this episode is just a win for both of us already. We do have to rate it, but before we do, I'd like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts and rate us 5 stars, or you can send this episode to a friend.
Every time you send this episode to a friend, someone somewhere gets their independence from the British.
Excellent. Let's rate this movie however many cave letters out of 10. You go first. I'm curious what you would do.
Gosh. Well, I think I'm gonna rate this miniseries 7.5 cave letters out of 10. It was just so interesting to me. I don't know if it was because I didn't know much about it. And like I said before, I haven't seen a lot of like Bollywood or pieces of media from this part of the world, but it was really fascinating to me, even the way that it was put together and the way it was made. I liked that they wrote female characters who felt really rich and who felt valuable to the plot, and that they did give them prominent places. It wasn't like, "Oh, yeah, there happens to be a women's regiment, we never talk about it again." It's like, yeah, we actually get to know some of these women who are involved. We actually get to see them participating and making themselves useful and that kinda stuff. So, yeah, I enjoyed it, and it's one of those ones where I could see myself watching it again, which is not always the case even when I really like a miniseries, so there is that. What about you?
I think I will rate it 7 cave letters out of 10. I enjoyed it. I thought maybe the production was a bit odd at places. I also struggled sometimes between them talking about abuse and rape and showing that very vividly and murder and all that. And then very quickly shifting into a funny scene again, in which, sometimes it feels a bit jarring. But overall, I think I will also probably watch it again. It's one of those that seems to grow on me already, so I wonder what happens if I watch it a third time. Yeah, I loved the acting. I really surprisingly really liked listening to something in Hindu, which don't know why, but usually I struggle with foreign languages because I have to pay attention more than usual. But it was really easy for this one. It's a very melodic sounding language, which is nice to listen to. So enjoyed that. Enjoyed the very patriotic theme song that I can sing along to now because it's the only song in the entire thing. Um, yeah, overall, just a good time. I would recommend you watch it. You can watch it on Prime.
Yeah.
Are you reading anything?
I'm still chipping away at From Here to Eternity by James Jones. It's a long one.
I am reading a new book.
Oh.
Yay, it's Dutch. It's from my book club, and it's about this affair that um I think it's real. I mean, there's a lot of poetry in there as well by other people. So I get to read random poetry while reading this book as well, which is fun. And
Yeah,
it's really short.
you really get some variety when you join a book club. You never know what you're gonna get.
No, and you don't know if it's gonna be interesting or not, which makes it interesting. I guess that's it for this week. I would like to thank you for listening to another episode of Rosie the Reviewer. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast. Please leave us a review for once. That would be fun. Um, you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more information. See you next week.
Bye.